All right, so that's what we're focusing on next on the program, and we do have Nasser El-Rufai, who is the governor of Kaduna State and a member of the Progressive Governors Forum. He joins us from our studios in Abuja. Good morning, Your Excellency. Thank you for joining us today on the program. Well, yes, we do know that Progressive Governors Forum have issued a statement concerning the minimum wage, but Labour at the moment still insists they are not happy. They think that governors are part of the people who have been trying to stall the plan to get 30,000 naira minimum wage approved. Is that the case?
No, that is not correct. The state governors are all aware that the levels of wages currently operating in the public service is low. I can speak, for instance, in the case of Kaduna State, one of the things that struck me upon coming into office as governor was the very low level of pay of public servants. And I was quite concerned, and we felt that something needed to be done. But this concern, this empathy must also be balanced by the resources available to pay. When we got into office, we found that 80% of the Federation account revenues of Kaduna State, as an example, go towards the payment of salaries. So on the one hand, you have a small minority, about 1% of the population, taking 80% of the resources, which is huge. But on the other hand, it's still poor. So you have badly paid workers taking a large percentage of the state's resources, leaving little for development. This is the challenge that most governors face. They have to balance the empathy, the need to pay workers wages that can take them to the end of the month and even save, against their ability to pay. And the resource base of most state governments is largely limited to what they get from Federation account, because our ability to raise and collect taxes is quite limited. Apart from states that already have industrial base like Lagos and Rivers and so on. This is the challenge of the governors. The spin that governors are against a higher wage for workers is most unfair and is not right.
This not be the same challenge you will face, even though the new minimum wage as it is now, we're waiting for the approval from the National Assembly and possibly Mr. President to assent to it. 27,000 naira, can they pay, considering recent history, when it was 18,000 naira, and a lot of states defaulted?
Yes, I can tell you that I'm aware that 1 or 2 states are unable to pay even the 18,000. And I think that we should be very careful about enacting a law that cannot be complied with. You'd recall that when President Buhari was sworn into office, he realized that 27 out of 36 states had accumulated salary arrears under the previous government and had to bail out states. Kaduna State was lucky to be one of the 9 states that could pay salaries, but even Kaduna inherited billions of naira of gratuity and pension arrears that we've been trying to clear. So this is the challenge. Some states would be able to pay, certainly, very easily, but most states will struggle. The reason why the Progressive Governors Forum and the Nigerian Governors Forum took time to study this is because we have to balance the level of wages, the minimum wage, with the ability of the states to pay. We hope that when all the numbers are in, many of the states will be able to pay. For instance, in the case of Kaduna State, as I said, when we came in, we realized this problem and we set up an internal committee, even before the debate on the minimum wage started, to look at raising the minimum wage and adjusting the salaries for every public servant in the state. The reason why it took so long is even after we got a report that recommended 25,000, for instance, in Kaduna, before the 27,000 was approved, I wanted this minimum wage translated into salary scales multiplied by the number of workers we have, so that I know for sure how much we are going to be spending monthly. Because we cannot spend 100% of our revenues on salaries alone and have little for development, because if we don't invest in infrastructure and human capital, if we just pay salaries of current workers, we are mortgaging the future of our children by not investing in the infrastructure needed to create jobs and grow the economy of the state. So this is the challenge. I think that this minimum wage will be a benchmark that every state will now go back, do a detailed salary scale from 0, 1 to 17, and multiply by the number of workers, and then see whether their sustainable revenues can pay for this. Kaduna is working on this, and I'm sure all our other colleagues in other states are doing the same thing. This is what needs to be done, and we must have a sense of balance and maturity on the part of labor unions on the one hand, who want more, as much as possible for workers, and the employers on the other. And I'm not talking just about public sector employers like the government. Even the private sector, when you raise the minimum wage beyond the capacity of companies to pay, what is likely to follow will be retrenchment. So do you want more unemployment in the country? So there has to be a very sensible and mature conversation about how to balance this in the national interest. And I hope that will take place as soon as the bill is enacted into law and assented to by Mr. President.
You know, Your Excellency, Labour believes that governments at the state level, they run a too big a government. And if they make it smaller or a leaner government, that those funds that they so much desire for the states to be able to pay the workers will become available. Your case in Kaduna State, I think you've made that submission at some point, that you've had to run a leaner, younger government. But the same cannot be said of other states. So what do we do at this point? Should state governments cut the number of special advisors they have to the governor, cut the number of ministries, for instance, some that are found to be running duplicatory roles? Will that help?
That will help. I think that there is a need for a major surgical operation on the structure and machinery of government. I agree with that. When we came into office, we found, for instance, the previous government in Kaduna had 23 or 24 commissioners, for the simple reason that we have 23 local governments in Kaduna State, 1 commissioner per local government. That is senseless. We merged ministries. We reduced the number of ministries from 24 to 13 initially. We are now at 14. And I think there is scope to merge ministries, departments, and agencies that have similar functions to reduce the number of people. I agree that, some state governments, some state governors has hundreds of special advisors and thousands of special assistants, and that will go down. It has to go down, and I think that this new minimum wage will actually induce that change. I believe that not just the state government, even the federal government needs to scale down, merge duplicating agencies. And there is, as I said before, there is a report, the Oronsayen report, done under the Jonathan Oyarado administration, I can't remember now, that forms a good basis for this restructuring. There is a need for us to have less ministries, a lower number of departments and agencies that are duplicating, and so on. But even when we do that, the critical issue is, after having done that, because we've done that in Kaduna, you would still have to address the number of people that work for the government. Do you need all the numbers that work for the government? You have to look at this and look at cadres that have been made obsolescent by technology. For instance, do you need typists in the public service when nobody uses typewriters anymore? Some of my children don't even know what a typewriter is because they were born long after typewriters have disappeared. But we still have typists as a cadre in the public service in some states. So this new minimum wage, my hope is, will induce state governments and the federal government to sit and take a holistic look at this. Because I remember when I was serving in General Abdul Salam Abubakar's government, the issue of minimum wage was raised by the Secretary to the Government and Head of Service, then Gidado Idris of blessed memory, and he persuaded General Abdul Salam Abubakar to raise the minimum wage by about 50%. We tried to do these numbers to see, okay, what is the impact of this on the wage bill of the government? But there was so much pressure to announce a minimum wage without doing the mathematics of the total wage bill. And by the time it was done, the wage bill tripled. 50% increase in minimum wage led to the tripling of the wage bill of the government of the Federation. This is the impact, because it's not just the minimum wage. Now we have moved the minimum wage by 50%, But if you allow that increase to translate at all levels, allowances, housing allowance, transport allowance are linked to the minimum wage as percentages, and what will happen is that you are not getting a 50% increase in the wage bill, but 300 or 400% increase. We have to be careful about that. State governments must look at this very well. Even the federal government must look at this very well and ensure that the impact of this increase in the minimum wage and other increases for other grade levels does not translate into a level of wages that the country or the state governments cannot sustain, or even the private sector cannot justify for Nigeria to be competitive in the global economy. Because the cost of labor is an input in determining the price of goods and services, and we are operating in a global economy, and we would lose out if our cost of production ends up being too high.